Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is the latest and potentially last installment of the Guardians films, giving a fitting conclusion to the circle of a-holes we've been following in a story as timeless as Star-Lord's music. I figured I'd make a little video on Volume 3, you know, since I've been gone. So in this assignment, I'll be listing a couple examples as to why this is, without a doubt, one of the best MCU projects, putting a finger to the throat of what came before it. Volume 3 is a straightforward film, focusing on Rocket's backstory and perfectly displaying the connection between all the Guardians. Now, despite being the end of the trilogy, it isn't necessary to watch the first two to be able to understand this one. But your reflexes may not be fast enough to catch what goes over your head. Like, Nebula's got a gun now? I mean, okay, she's always had a gun, but like, she could stab people with. Okay, well, she's always stabbed people too, but like, her arm. She's got like a Mega Man thing going on. When did that happen? Admittedly, the Guardians movies have never been the most accurate when it came to the source material. They took a lot more creative liberties compared to the rest of the MCU. For a team with a literal tree, sticking to their roots was not in their credentials, but that's just it. How do you make a movie about a talking space tree? The Guardians of the Galaxy were not only pretty niche, but also a curious cast of characters. It's understandable they would have to deviate a little bit to adapt them for a general audience. The direction that James Gunn took with the films worked. There is a trilogy. However, this was a double-edged sword as it felt like that disconnection from the comics led to some parts becoming directionless. And with no outline to follow, things could get too convoluted for their own good. The Guardians story started to feel a tad bit empty, and in all honesty, like they're just kind of making stuff up. Volume 2 is where they suffered from this the most. The film wasn't all there. I mean, to introduce the idea of Peter being a god, to then revoke that in the same movie, for what it can be, it became nothing. Luckily, Guardians of Ban Chapter 3 fixes this issue. As the end of the trilogy, you would imagine it to be the biggest, but it isn't. It's overall a much simpler story, and that helps it keep a more focused narrative. The film is centered on Rocket and the team's efforts to save him. With everyone working towards the same objective throughout the movie, it keeps all parts together, giving it the time and room to be fully fleshed out. Not only that, but Super Guardians 3D World seems to have taken inspiration from a particular Rocket Raccoon story. Although the group we see in the MCU is the most recurring, they do swap out with other characters and play in single-player mode sometimes. One of Rocket's tales is of a place called Half-World. It's a planet very similar to Earth, and there he runs into all sorts of highly evolved animals, some of which are mechanically altered. I imagine this is where the inspiration for the High Evolutionary and Counter-Earth came from. Volume 3, incorporating this story, gives it more of an outline to follow. It has something to grab onto. Having certain elements of the story already established keeps it on track. And that's important when even the actors think the characters were jank at times. Volume 3 isn't muddied up by too many things happening, it keeps you on one objective. It's a preferable tone to have for a conclusion, giving it that space to properly end. It was worrying seeing that the Guardians were just being whatever the MCU needed to service the story, but it seems like they learned to swim. Now, as Rocket is the center of the galaxy for this movie, it dives into more of his origins, giving glimpses of gradually getting geared up and how that ties to the rest of the Guardians of the Galaxy. Volume 3. Going back to the comic for a second, you may have noticed some familiar faces. Part of Rocket's origins and Guardians revolves around other creatures he meets that were also affected by the High Evolutionary. Lila, the otter, Teefs, who in this comic at least is called Walrus, and his tusks can shoot lasers, and of course, Floor. Floor isn't in the comic, not sure if they exist elsewhere, but they're a worthy addition regardless. There is a character called Blackjack O'Hare, but to say this is the same character, it's like showing a picture of Green Toad and claiming it's Yoda. Guardians of the Galaxy Tokyo Drift perfectly utilizes the characters to establish pure dread. The element of these creatures being brought into this new plane of existence leads to a truly terrifying moment in the film, that having this new form of life comes a new form of death. Not simply the loss of life, but the loss of desire. Despite their situation, Rocket and his pals are able to find fun, growing a bond between them, one that gets stronger when Rocket tells them about Counter-Earth. We see this dream that they share, holding out hope for a better place, getting so attached and going as far as to create new names for themselves. But Counter-Earth wasn't meant for them, and when Rocket tries to get his friends and escape, it only leads to him losing them. This scene unfolds into pure chaos, which is set up perfectly. It's horrifying. Gives you that pit in your stomach. You could feel Rocket's pain because the movie gave you that time to resonate with their desire. Plus, it becomes amplified by the fact that they're just starting to understand what it meant to have these dreams. I almost can't put into words how this movie made me feel, and putting into words how movies make me feel is like my whole thing here. Especially being someone who read Tales from Half-World. That was a part of my introduction to the world of the Guardians. I've been waiting to see these characters on screen for like almost a decade. I'll never fully recover. The kicker of all of it, though, is that there is guilt that Rocket has because of it. He was the one that brought back the idea of a brand new world to look forward to. He was the one that started the escape and ultimately got them killed in Crossfire. It's that guilt that follows him in this movie and what influences his actions to save the rest of the animals and spare the High Evolutionary. Or at least not be the thing that kills him. As a guardian of the galaxy, he takes the job of protecting life, not taking it. To put things in retrospective, it amplifies what he says in Endgame to Thor about those who are gone and those who are only kind of gone. You know you have a good story on your hand when it enhances what came before it. The emotion in the scene, it's enough. I've wanted to see Walrus for so long. It would be kinda hypocritical if this movie was perfect. As much as it keeps itself together compared to other Guardian outings, there is one small factor across the trilogy that became a major issue in this movie. The inconsistency of the exposure to space. It's a given that these movies already have a high suspension of disbelief. The raccoon talks, the tree walks, the dog can move things with its thoughts. Never that big of a problem if certain things don't make all too much sense. However, the way that the characters interact with space itself has always felt like they never had a handle on it. It's one of those smaller things that gets under your skin, like that stupid shirt. That's not his name! This smaller problem may have ended up undermining a big part of the film's ending. They seem to have blurred the line between oxygen and atmosphere. Throughout the movies, the effects of space have stayed fairly consistent, that's including Avengers Infinity War, though there are some scenes where it gets a little wonky as to just how long someone could withstand the vacuum of space. In Guardians Episode 1, for reference, Gamora is floating in the void for about a minute before Quill goes out to save her. Equipping his helmet on her, she is able to breathe again while Peter begins to freeze. This establishes that there is a window where you can survive. Yet, getting to Galaxy Episode 2, this window shortens as Yondu seems to have accelerated effects. He doesn't freeze immediately, but he was not in space for as long as them. Now, with this all in mind, we're brought to the scene in Episode 3 where this becomes a bigger problem. Star-Lord's jump back to nowhere. The inconsistencies with space lead to two factors that somewhat ruin this scene. The first one, a little bit earlier in the movie when the Guardians are launching their assault on the High Evolutionary ship, they get swarmed. In this, a hole is punched into Rocket's windshield, but overall, he's left unaffected. You mean to tell me that Rocket just got back from dying to death, and a hole is punched into his ship, but he's fine? Furthermore, something similar happens to Peter and Gamora when Adam Warlock smashes into their ship, completely shattering the windshield, yet not so much as an alarm goes off. After which both ships are able to continue flying with no risk to the Guardians. Volume 3 may have gotten too caught up in itself, as based on what we've seen before, the Guardians should have been at more of a risk than they were. And the second factor, where is Star-Lord's helmet? This man goes all of Guardians of the Galaxy title without his equipment. He only has the guns. The last time these idiots were in a movie was Love and Thunder, where you could see he has his helmets and jet boots. And we get to the holiday special and now they're magically gone. These two factors are why him missing the jump at the end doesn't have the impact it should. He is the one character that specifically has tools to help him withstand space. During the prison escape in Guardians the first one, Peter was able to make it back to the ship without a suit because he had his helmet. Plus, Volume 3 already nullified the effects of space from what happened with Adam Warlock, so even though Quill is saved in this scene, the initial shock is lessened when you know he should have been able to avoid situations like this. This film is aware of what it is. Volume 3 being the conclusion to the trilogy, it understood what was expected from it, that the characters must come to some sort of conclusion. From the tone of the trailer, it was looking to be the end for a couple of the Guardians, and there's a lot pointing to this. Some of the actors straight up confirming this would be their last appearance, a lot of the marketing focusing on specific characters. It was really starting to look like certain Guardians weren't gonna make it to the next playlist. Most notably, Rocket. Further example, I work in a movie theater, and every time there's a big release, there's these collectible popcorn tins that are sold alongside them. Guardians 3 had two. One with everyone on it, minus Gamora for whatever reason, and the other with purely Rocket. It was just him, much like the build-up for the movie. With Rocket front and center, a lot of people began to speculate that his story was going to be wrapped up in a body bag. Usually with movies like this, the stakes are expected to be raised. The consequences of the final face-off, which typically translates to huge losses. Gamora and Vision in Infinity War, Natasha and Tony in Endgame, or even Aunt May in No Way Home. But this is how The Legend of Guardians Breath of the Galaxy sets up a subversion of expectations. Throughout the entire movie, the Guardians brush death, coming close and getting into tricky situations, but not actually dying. Almost like they're playing with the expectations set by the trailers. And my greatest example for this is the opening scene. From the trailer, we had no context for this. It looked like Quill was dying, but he really just passed out from drinking too much. Then when Nebula put him in his bed, she pulled a blanket over him like she was covering a body. Bro, they knew what they were doing. They knew. And then again, when Mantis is talking to Peter about going back to Earth, at one point she says, "Are you about to die?" They're toying with the idea. These are the absolute best fourth wall breaks, by the way. I want to see more stuff like this. Also appreciated when Ratcatcher was just staring at the camera for 3 minutes. That was fun. Guardians of the Galaxy Dominion knows that you think some of them will die, which is what makes it better when they all survive. It subverts all those expectations, but not in a way that mocks the audience for thinking a certain way. Instead, each of the Guardians are in search of a newer purpose and concluding their time in a more satisfying way. Nebula is able to provide what she never had to the kids. Drax is able to be a dad again. Mantis and Peter start their solo journeys to find more of themselves, and Rocket keeps fighting for others to see the sky. And then Groot says, Groot said more words. Everybody give him a hand. I am so proud of him. The end of the Guardians felt like it was going to be the end of the Guardians. But no, you can have the characters move on without having them move on. This is something that the Suicide Squad, another one of Gunn's films, didn't do too well. And knowing that, it was a fear that one of the Guardians was just going to randomly be killed at any point. For example, when Mantis was calming the giant monster from the second film, very afraid that she was just gonna get eaten, no rhyme or reason, like with Polka Dot Man. But they're the freaking Guardians of the Galaxy. They got more to give than that. Like, they're really gonna have a whole story about them saving Rocket, succeeding, and just to kill him anyway. They're the freaking Guardians of the Galaxy, Quill. I need his leg, alright? Just trust me on this one. I need his leg, Quill. Get the leg. Galaxy of the Guardians, Volume 3 is the best possible ending. It wouldn't have been right to have any of them die. Especially with how much of the film revolves around their relationships with one another. This is the strongest the characters have been. With how much they've grown, it couldn't have done them justice to just have all of that stop. This is a good note to end on. So with that being said, if you like the video, dislike it. It's a weird YouTube glitch. I'll run you through it. Dislike is for like is for subscribe, sub is for share. Wait, no, I messed up. Like is for comment is for share is for subscribe, dislike is for like. Yeah. Thanks for watching. Thanks to my creative writing teachers, one of which had us watch Guardians in 9th grade. So far, the only teacher who prepared me for my future. I just think that's kind of funny. But now, I must go and find a new part of myself. Preferably an arm.